Let's take a look at some non-gridded constructions because you're going to run into those as well. And we're going to start with the Hope of Hartford block, which we started in a previous lesson. In that lesson, you had completed the patches up to sewing your 3 triangles together. At that point, after that, we would sew the 4 rectangles onto each patch. And now we're going to put it together, but where do you start? As you can see, there's no seam that runs completely from one side of the block to the other. So where do you go? Well, there's a really cool process called partial seaming that we're going to use to put together blocks like this. So we lay out our pieces as they're going to go together, and we're going to begin by sewing the lavender square to the first patch, but only halfway, as I've done here. So just a half seam, and we'll press it. We'll press towards the lavender square. Now we have a complete edge that we can sew this next patch onto. So once that's sewn in place, we now have a complete edge down here to sew the 3rd patch in place. And once that's in place, we can now sew the 4th one in place as well. And now all that's left to be finished is that very first seam that we started. So we go back and sew this, and we have our block put together. Very good example of partial seaming, and it is something you will see in quite a number of blocks, especially a lot of the older flower blocks like double aster. Now let's take a look at some of the other blocks that we have that do not fall into a gridded category. And this first one is called Starry Path. And again, there's nothing that runs vertically or horizontally. In fact, the 2 main seams run completely from corner to corner. So this would be an X block construction, kind of like the option we chose with framed puzzle. The only difference is with this one, there is no option to do a 4-patch construction like we could with framed puzzle. It does have to go together in this X construction. So we would sew each of these 4 triangle pieces together to form the 4 big triangle patches, and we'd sew them together with this X. Okay, so you'll see a lot of blocks with this type of X construction. This next block is a little bit different. It's still put together in a diagonal form, but these are diagonal bars. So we're going to piece a bar that goes through the middle, and then 2 triangle units that are sewn together and then attached to the center bar. Lots and lots of blocks with this kind of construction. So in a way, it is an X construction, but it doesn't have a center seam. It has bars, a bar that goes through the middle, and then triangle units on either side. Now this block, this is a variation on a Delectable Mountain block. I call it Mountain Home or Mountain Fire. Again, the construction is not vertical and horizontal seams in any way, shape, or form. You have this one diagonal seam that goes not even from corner to corner, it goes from side to side here on a diagonal. So this unit will be pieced, this unit will be pieced, and then they'll be joined together to create the block. But within this unit, you do have a quasi-grid kind of construction here. You would form this unit, the 4-patch for the corner, the unit here, and then your triangle that joins them together. So again, you would have a bit of a grid in there. The log cabin block would be formed in a circular fashion, which we're going to see here in a minute, and then the 2 triangles sewn to either side. Then the block is joined together. So sometimes you have to look to see where your break apart points are. Now this high-rise block is another good example of a center bar. So this is a diagonal construction, but we're going to have a center bar and then these 2-piece triangle units that go to either side of it. Again, another good example of diagonal construction. This Birds in the Air block is something completely different in that it does have a seam that runs completely from corner to corner and only one. The block is put together in 2 halves, but they're triangular halves. This one's unpieced. This one has 3 half-square triangle units, some plain half-square triangles, and we can sew these together in a row form and then add this on the bottom and sew this together. So again, quite a number of blocks also that have this one single diagonal seam that join the 2 parts together. Snail's Trail is a good example of the same kind of thing as a log cabin, where you have a circular construction where you start with a piece in the middle. In this case, it's a 4-patch. And we start building triangles around the 4-patch to square it off. Then we put more triangles onto that center square and keep building triangles out in a circular fashion to create the block. So again, no grid. It's built out in a circular kind of explosion kind of concept there. And last for this kind of a block is a basket block. Everybody loves basket blocks. And within the basket block, again, there's no seam that goes completely from one side to the other, but this part of the basket block can be constructed as a grid. We have the big half-square triangle unit, the little ones, so we would assemble this in a kind of a grid fashion. But then we have this rectangle with a triangle that's sewn onto the two sides, and the last seam is actually sewing this triangle onto the base of the basket. So again, we have to really take a close look at how the seams work, what comes apart first, so we know what goes together first. The last thing I want to show you is this little table topper. There's only one shape in this quilt, and it's this equilateral triangle that you can see here. It's repeated, turned upside down, every other one, and sewn together to form rows. So what looks like stars is not actually stars. The stars are created by sewing these equilateral triangles together in rows and then joining the rows to create the quilt top. It's a very, very simple construction. There are quite a number of quilts that also use tessellations. Hexagons are one of them. You'll see many examples of these when you start looking through books of blocks or quilt designs.